So the way it worked out is quite cool, but also a little bit intimidating because now I have more time to talk, and I was prepared for for this one, but not the first one. So let's see if I can not repeat myself too many times. I'm really lucky to be chatting about the topic today in particular is living my activism and what it means to be community-led, in my opinion. And I'm hoping that tech is going to be my friend afterwards. We don't know right now. This is fine for now. And yeah, okay, hopefully. So yeah, I think when it comes down to, for now, I'm just going to speak a little bit about me and some of my thoughts around it, some of the observations. But hopefully by the end of this, we'll be able to share a little bit of thoughts from our community back home in SA and some awesome allies as well. And just when it comes down to it, for me, activism is very personal. I'm going to move this over here. Sorry, I've made notes on my phone. As a person who uses drugs, activism is not just a job, but it's a lifestyle. It's a part of my life and the lives of people I love and care about. In an ideal world, we should be able to be open and honest about who we are all the time. But unfortunately, in some countries and in some spaces and settings, that's not the case. Drug use is not only frowned on in some cases, but at times outright punished, usually by harsh laws and really messed up penalties. And I think this is also why activism is so important, because people in spaces that can create change, especially that on a global level, should be able to be open and active. Like I said a little bit earlier, some people are not so lucky, some countries are not so forgiving. So if we are sitting in a space and we do have that opportunity for change, we should be using it. We should be able to be open and active about drug use, our drug use in particular, and I think that's kind of one of the points, is that activism is personal, advocacy is personal, just as much as drug use is personal. And activism is important because in spaces that you can create some policy reform, you can push for push for drug policy reform from a personal perspective, and at times sit in a space or keep a space warm for someone else who might still have the opportunity, or worse still, someone who will never have that opportunity. And in that case, acting as a voice for people who may not have that freedom to be able to be yourself, or the freedom to be open about your drug use out of fear of reprisal, punishment, and in some cases, death. In South Africa, specifically, we want to create safe spaces and platforms like the People Who Use Drugs-led networks, both nascent, local, and even Sandpod, which we're lucky to have, but also to work to establish the People Who Use Drugs sector. And in this space, also encourage personal growth to challenge the ever-looming stigma and untrue narrative of what a person who uses drugs looks like, what we're meant to act like, how we're meant to dress and the likes, and not even to actually push back on that. It's important that people who use drugs who are in a position are in a safe enough context to be open about our drug use, that we are actually using our voice to drive this change. People in positions of power who have freedom to be yourselves, but who may not be open about drug use, should push aside that self-stigma and maybe choose to be open about who you are. When people in these spaces are vocal, they have a greater chance of impact. Yeah, okay, sorry for anyone who's been listening a little bit to me, but I'm gonna say it again. For me to stand or sit and speak anything, some people are not gonna take me seriously because I don't have a PhD. I don't have tons and tons of experience other than the lived experience. And that, for me, is really important. And in some cases, it's also just as special. But unfortunately, in very high-level spaces, it doesn't actually matter what paperwork I have, what degree I have, what matric I have, what high school I went to, what university I went to is a lot more important than what I've lived through, what I've seen, what I've seen people I love live through. That's a little bit messed up. So if we can create spaces as well for PhDs, for doctors, for people who do have these academic or these paper backings, if people can also feel comfortable and safe enough to be open about their drug use when having such a standing, I think we can create a safe space as well. If a doctor feels comfortable enough to say openly that I'm actually a drug user and I'm here for change, it can be impactful. And I feel it's also our responsibility as activists and advocates and representatives to make sure that people do feel safe and do feel unstigmatized. I spoke about being feeling like an imposter in the space, but that was also because I felt like, oh, I haven't injected opiates before or something, and I don't know if I deserve to have this seat. And it's by working with people and gain incredible mentors who sat with me and said, not only do you have some experience and some space to share, but at the same time, you're creating a space for someone else. And that's also really important. And I kind of feel like if we are able to create this warm, welcoming space, no matter who you are, what you look like, whether you don't have a PhD or whether you have a PhD, for someone to feel safe enough to live their activism, to live their lives. Because people in power who are open about their drug use have a lot more pull to change, unfortunately, in some spaces. So if we live our drug user activism and announce our drug use, not hiding from it, to be proud of who we are and the changes we can make those changes to our community. So the more voices from multiple backgrounds and experiences that stand up and share our truth, the more we can stand together to challenge narratives that perpetuate and marginalize people and create harms. Ultimately, by living our activism and standing together, we become harder to silence, wiser as a movement, and stronger as a community. And so saying this, yesterday we had a storytelling session, and I'm really, really grateful to have had this opportunity today to share a little bit about mine, to tell a bit of my story, and give a little bit of my input. However, I'd also, like I said earlier, like to give and offer the opportunity to some of our community in SA, as well as some of the incredible allies we have back home, to share some of their thoughts on a really important topic. A side note about the video that I'm going to hopefully will be able to share is that, like I said a bit earlier, people sometimes don't feel safe enough, to be honest, whether that's about being a person who uses drugs, or whether that's about being a person who supports harm reduction. And again, to be able to give this person a vehicle, they've chosen to be anonymous, and I have mad respect for that, because they're from a law enforcement background in South Africa, and it can be risky. However, the fact that this person has still taken the time to send something through, I have respect for that, and I can appreciate that. And I think it's another example of living a form of activism, living your activism in a space that you can, to the extent that you can, to still stand for something, even if you have to stand a little bit lower. But I feel as it's our, like I said, it's our role as communities to make sure that people can feel safe enough to be themselves. So I'd like to now introduce this short video. It was meant to be launched at the AIDS conference, but unfortunately technical difficulties didn't happen. So instead, I'd like to share this video from our incredible team and humans back home.
Decriminalization of drug use in South Africa has the potential to improve public health services and reduce gender-based violence for women who use drugs by allowing us to freely access harm reduction services without fear.
Decrim to me means a safer and a better future for the upcoming generation.
It means that homeless people won't get arrested and end up in prison just because you don't have a home and you live on the side of the street, or you use a small amount of drugs like smoking a joint, or you're addicted to heroin, and go for the dealers. Leave us alone. I mean, it's not right to put us in prison for a small amount of drugs, you know. It's our own thing to do drugs.
I think decriminalization would ease engagements with a lot of gatekeepers and crucial stakeholders. This will lead to a more inclusive economy that ensures that it leaves no one behind.
Changes in drug policy and decriminalization could greatly influence the work that STAN does, allowing for more effective and compassionate interventions for vulnerable populations. It could also help shift resources towards prevention, harm reduction, and treatment, ultimately improving the lives and the well-being of those most affected by substance dependence and gender-based violence. Decriminalization would also allow for a more human rights-based approach to addressing the root causes of substance dependence and gender-based violence in South Africa.
Decriminalization of drugs would benefit us because it would mean a change in policies and laws that recognize us as criminals just because we are substance users.
If drugs were decriminalized, it would mean that there would be less human rights violations and less people going to prison and getting a criminal record. So it will make life much easier for people who use drugs.
So changes, positive changes in drug policy in South Africa would mean that I wouldn't have to worry about confiscation of needles and harm reduction packs in my Global Fund programs. It would mean that I don't need to turn someone away that needs OST services harm reduction support in any geographical location. It would mean that my government would be better resource and supportive of needle and syringe programs and every other harm reduction services in South Africa.
Decriminalization to me means that there'll be less crime. I won't be seen as a criminal because if they catch me with a small amount of drugs, they won't charge me, I won't go to jail, I won't be a criminal because unfortunately I'm a user but I'm not a criminal.
So decriminalization would mean to me less human rights violations. People using drugs would not be tried or convicted for petty crimes or possessions of whatever substances, and in the general sense laws would change and that would help with service improvement for people maybe who was on drugs and homeless people.
Decriminalization of drugs will have a positive impact in the lives of people who use drugs.
Yeah, for me, decriminalization will mean more resources for those who are in need.
Decriminalization for me means putting a stop to unlawful arrest.
Okay, so in terms of the change in drug policy, I think if we could have possession of amounts of narcotics deemed small enough for personal use, be it heroin or whatever else. I think if we could at least achieve that, we would avoid the criminalization of the poorest of the poor, which I think is the biggest step we could ever take going forward.
Thank you.